Let's get started. Welcome everybody to the Q modules proposal feedback call. I think we slightly need to rename this as a Q modules feedback session as opposed to exclusively a proposal feedback session, because as we'll demonstrate, we're sort of firmly into the mode of making that proposal into an experimental implementation as well. So what we're going to cover today is actually going through a bit of a sort of an update on where we're at, discussion of recent progress, decisions, drifting into talking about auth generally. And Roger's going to give us a walkthrough of a module we've been working on in support of the work we've been doing for the OCI-based, sort of the OCI-backed piece of the Q modules. We've got a couple of demos, and Daniel's going to then wrap up by walking through an end-to-end test setup that we've put in place to obviously make our lives easier as we're developing this stuff, especially with it being fast-moving, experimental. We sort of need to understand exactly what works or doesn't work at any point in time. And so we put in place a basic backbone of an end-to-end test setup. So switching to an update on progress, I'll just sort of give a quick high-level overview of this because we then go into a bit more detail on it. So where are we right now? And Roger and Daniel, please jump in where I've misremembered parts of this here. Fundamentally, we're at a point where we have evaluation of Q code that depends on external modules right now. There's nuance to that point. That's what we'll see in a demo from Roger in just a bit. We previously called the public-private split the situation where there are public modules on the central registry and also perhaps a dependency on a private module that exists on something other than the central registry. We're going to have to change the name public-private split because, as we've sort of quickly worked out, it's absolutely not fit for purpose. But this ability to say, I have these modules, especially perhaps private modules that come from this registry over here, and say everything else comes from, say, the central registry over here. We have an implementation of that now as well. Roger, as I mentioned, is going to talk through what a module that we've written sort of with OCI. I don't want to say specifics, but aspects of the OCI implementation that we need to depend on in a very lightweight dependency way. We have an experimental QMod upload command, and just to emphasize that everything we're doing at the moment is experimental. So even the name upload in this situation is very experimental. And so we just want to be super clear that actually we will break stuff here because it's experimental. Upload could be renamed, etc., etc. But you'll see QMod upload in a demo shortly, so just wanted to call out that that's part of the demo. End-to-end tests, as we said, for experimental modules implementation, that's really just helping us make progress faster. We've got a very lightweight test script-based end-to-end test setup, and Daniel's going to give us a demo of that. And there's also been progress on the central registry backend as well, and we will sort of share a bit more details of that on subsequent updates. Rog, I think you probably want to take over with a screen share at this point now to walk us through the OCI registry module. Is that okay?
Okay, yeah, I will do that. Hold on, I shall share my screen. There we go. Actually, maybe I'll put that on the other screen so I can see people's faces. Yeah, so this particular module, Go module, was born out of the fact that there were sort of standard libraries for dealing with OCI, with the OCI Open Container Interface API, but they were almost all client only. No, they didn't do very well for providing your own in-memory servers, for example, which we wanted to do for tests. And they're all quite heavyweight in terms of dependencies. And since we want this to be a dependency of the Q tool itself, we don't, for example, want to depend on the Docker CLI module, which for example, doesn't even have a go.mod file. So it's just not ideal to depend on. So I had an idea to make this module, and actually it turned out quite nicely. So I'm quite happy with the interface actually, and the interface is actually called interface, a little bit like so OCI registry.interface, and it's basically a set of methods all at one level which represent all the capabilities of an OCI registry. They map pretty much one-to-one with the endpoints in the HTTP API, which if you're interested in these things, you might have seen. It's the distribution API. So you can get a blob given a digest. You can get a tag. You can do like basically all these things. And there are a limited, a reasonable number, but limited number of them. So the first thing I wanted to do with it was actually make an in-memory server so we could test our code against that. And I was actually using another client at that point. But so I made this OCI server implementation, which takes one of these interfaces and returns you an HTTP handler. So that means that basically you could any implementation of this turns into an HTTP handler, which serves the OCI registry API. And then there's if you want something in memory and easy to set up, then you've got OCI mem, which implements it just implements this. These are all the methods of the interface. Implements this just as an in-memory thing. So that's great for tests. And then to sort of complete that trifecta, there's this OCI client implementation, which given like you tell it to talk to this host, it returns you an implementation of that interface. So that's really handy having those two things, because if you put the client together with the server, then suddenly you get a proxy, because you're accepting incoming HTTP requests, which are then turning into outgoing HTTP requests to another server. And you can actually put things like there are some interesting sort of transformations you can do in the middle that actually transform. So, for example, I want to provide just a read-only version. So this maps from an interface to a read-only version of the same interface, or you can actually like Go FS. You can say, okay, we'll actually only talk to a little bit of this other registry. So we're actually using that as part of our back end. So we're actually for the central registry, we're actually layered on top of a public registry, but we only use a little bit of it. And another thing to mention is the auth package, which like authorization is something that isn't actually in the OCI spec, but there's pretty much a standard, a fairly standard thing, which is used by Docker, and which most of the standard tools for dealing with OCI registries implement. And so this implements that for a client at any rate. So that means that it knows about the Docker config file. It knows how to run helper commands to get keys and that sort of thing. So that's a brief overview of this. As I say, I'm quite happy with it. It's only used by us so far, but it's actually general purpose. There's nothing. It's in its own module. It's actually generally useful, I think. So I could go at this point into a little demo of.
Rog, just briefly before we move on, if you don't mind, just going back to the docs for a second. So just for those listening, their benefit here, we are using this module and the packages within this module within not actually command Q, but within packages, within packages within the Q module. Can you just explain where that is, and then what role the auth piece plays there? Because of course we talked on previous calls about this public-private split situation, and these packages you're talking about here are effectively fundamental building blocks in that client piece.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so we are actually using it in Command Q now. That if you enable the Q modules experiment, so these some of these packages are actually compiled in, and so the auth piece. I mean, this is the entry point inside. It's actually just looks more or less like an HTTP piece of middleware, except they also say what kinds of operations I require to do, because that's part of the protocol for acquiring authorization tokens. Where are we? The standard, standard authorizer implements the authorization dances that are documented by Docker and done by the standard tools. So that means that I can use my existing configuration that I put in docker slash config.json, and it will, I can, whereas before where I could use an existing tool like Scopio or Crane to copy items from to the former registry. Now the Q tool also has that capability, just with the standard authorization setup. So if you put keys in there, if your helper command knows how to get the keys, whatever, you'll just be able to use the Q command to talk to your own registry, just the same as any other tool would use that configuration file to talk to the registry. So that
sounds great.
Help. So I'll just do a little demo of that. So I've made this GitHub repository called QMod test. It's almost nothing in there, but I've pushed this up. Well, I've created this, and it's got a module.q file that says we are module. We've actually gone for a slightly, if you're familiar with Go's version qualifiers, we've actually gone for a slightly different approach here, where we're using at the end, at v1. And so we've got this thing. So now we want to publish it. So let's take this out. Forgive the unconventional editor. QLabs. It's my local version of it. Here we are. Here's the version in here. So let's say we want to make it say something like, we've got this value, so this is a proxy. This is a placeholder for some arbitrary functionality you might want to publish. Deeps, for example. Okay, so we're
so now you're looking to effectively publish a new version of this module.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm about to publish. So I've made this change to this code. It's going to say hello peeps, or rather, it's going to publish the value hello peeps. And now I'm going to make I've actually, one thing. The reason I wanted to go here is I've actually installed a GitHub app. I've installed this QModule Publisher app, which isn't actually, I mean, we can use it, but it's not recommended for use yet. But it's, just demonstrating. And what this does, if I do git tag v 1.0.1, say, actually, let's git tag q, and the tags all have q hyphen in front of them, because that means that they're not going to interact badly with existing tags that look like semvertex. Push those tags. Oops. Okay, now we've got now the GitHub app at this point has will see the new tag, and it will actually make that available inside the central registry, hopefully. So if we go to another.
And the reason that's possible today is that this is a public module that we're looking at here within your repository. And so the GitHub app, at least as we can see, is that to start with, would be for public modules. Yeah. We previously talked about how for non-central registry modules, we will support QMod upload, and ultimately we'll support the same for the central registry itself. So the GitHub app publisher that Rog is taking advantage of here, it is really something that is there constantly watching your repository, watching for new versions of things, and then auto-publishing them. That's how to hold the GitHub app in this flow. Yeah.
So hopefully it's done that by this point, and we want to import it. So here we're importing it, and we're importing the value. We also, as well as just the import, we need a module file which says what versions we need to import it as. Q.mod module.q. Oops. And here we are. So this is where I've I've got the dependency. So I've said that this version is at v. Oh, actually, I've said v. Let's say v1. And now if I set q experiment equals modules and q registry equals the temporary name that we're using at the moment, which is q registry.q.works. If I do q eval, I'll export dot, then hopefully, where are we? Oh, we're not in the right place. Q dot. Then, oh, it's actually done it. So that pulled down the module from the central registry and ran it. So that's the sort of public scenario case, but it's not uncommon that you might want to have some modules come from a private registry as well as using something from the public registry. So let's assume that we've got so we've got this. I made a private, something called QMod test private, which is its own. So it's called. I've called it this. So I'm not going to publish this to GitHub. Actually, I'm only going to publish it on my private registry. And it's just to keep things interesting, I'm actually going to import the QMod test thing we just did from our private module. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually set QMod registry. So this is going to demonstrate the. So we could say
named public-private split.
Yeah, so I like the term private split horizon modules, because basically it's like you're going to, depending on what module you're talking about, you'll go to one registry or another. So this is an example. So we're saying that anything inside github.com/q/private is going to go to this registry. It's actually this repository inside this registry. And then anything else is going to go to registry.q.works. I think we need module experiment as well. And if I do qmod upload, the 0.3.0 say, yeah, nice error message, Roger, thank you. And that, okay, so that has actually, if we'd seen what it was actually doing under the hood there, it was actually using my Docker config file, which tells it to run the gcloud helper thing. So it uses that to acquire a key. It used that. So this was a secure upload. And then if we go back to use.
But just to be clear, sorry quickly, the reason you've run qmod upload there, and just to make clear a point here, previously with the public module, you didn't run qmod upload. You tagged it and pushed the tag, because as we said, for now, the central registry can only be used with the GitHub app as its means of sort of auto-publishing things once it sees a new tag. But here the qmod upload has worked, because essentially you're doing something not against the central registry. This is sort of imagining the scenario of someone using their own company registry backend and wanting to publish something to that. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
Perfect.
So here's an example of how you might use it. So here we're getting something from the private thing. We're also getting something from the public thing. So we're getting them both together, and we just export both together. And then we're going to so this is the same module we had before, but we're making it slightly. We're adding another dependency, and I think we published 020. So let's change that. So we've uploaded there. We're going to use it. Let's try it out. So we'll need the experiment again. We'll need exactly the same value for Q registry, and we can do Q export dot chunkity chunk. That's pulled modules bound from both registries, and there we have. And note that that they both had different versions of they were both actually depending on different versions of use QModTest, but because we're using MVS as a module version resolution algorithm, it's chosen the latest of them. So we've got that, and we've got this private thing that we had in the private version. So that's thus concludes the demo.
If I could play a round of applause at this point, I think I would. That's very nice, because just one question, Roger, if you don't mind, going back to the within the main module there, where you've just done the Q export, i.e. where you express the dependency, exactly there. On the second import, where you haven't specified an @v something, could you just talk about that?
Yes, so that's again slightly different from the Go world, which Go modules are quite similar to Q modules, but we made some changes which we thought actually would make things easier for people, which is that you don't have to specify a major version if you don't want to, because one of our thoughts is that actually people in configuration change major versions more often. So the major version in the import path is actually automatically derived from the major version that's in your module.q file. So if I change this to v1, then this will be importing major version v1. That doesn't mean that you can't import different major versions at the same time. That aspect is similar to Go. So you could say have v0 and v1 if you want, and there would be different imports. But by default, the major version comes from what you've declared in module.q.
Fantastic. And then just looking at the module.q on the right-hand side here, and really is a precursor to what you're looking at next. You were making changes by hand there effectively in that module.q. That sort of nicely tees up the next focus. Do you want to talk a bit about that as well?
Yeah, so the next actual significant piece, because actually juggling versions and editing this file yourself and working out what's available is a right hassle, and it's easy to get wrong. So I'm working on an equivalent of GoModTidy, QModTidy, which basically takes all your Q source files, looks at the dependencies, finds appropriate versions, gets rid of unused dependencies, updates everything so it's nice and clean. So you can be sure that when you run QModTidy, all your dependencies are in a good state and ready for ready for publishing, basically.
So just taking the code we have on the left-hand side here, where in that file where your cursor just is now, and assuming an empty module.q on the right-hand side, a QModTidy would actually then leave you with the module.q on the right-hand side as we see it now, a modulo sort of syntax changes.
I mean, almost entirely with the dependencies. I mean, you still have to declare what your local module name is, because there's no way for it to guess.
Sorry, yeah, I was careless there. I said empty. I should have said empty with the exception of the first line. Thank you.
Although that brings us to something that we were discussing today. Actually, at the moment, you're allowed a module.q file with no module or an empty module, and that's actually potentially useful when you never intend to have it imported by anything, but you still want dependencies. In Go, you have to kind of invent a name like test or something like that. In Q, maybe just having an empty module is fine, but we still need to make some decisions about that.
Sounds good. Daniel, am I forgetting anything in terms of what else we were going to demo at this point, or is it now time to flip over to the end-to-end tests? Daniel's nodding, so I'll take that as a yes. Do you want to take over the screen share, Daniel?
Yep. One sec. So what I will demo now, briefly, is basically the same thing that Roger just demoed, but automated. So I will run this, and you will see two subtests running in parallel concurrently. They take about 6 seconds each, and I'll just look through the logs of what they did. So the first one, let's look at this one first. So the first one is an end-to-end test for creating a new GitHub repo in an org where the app is already installed. And this is what this is explaining. And then git push a tag with some basic content. And let's look at the basic content here. So publish, again, the module.q file is very basic, just some module. And the actual Q value is just a field. It's nothing fancy. git config, git add, git commit, that's all standard. Git tag, q dash, in this case, the version we're pushing is 0.0.1, you can see it there. We push that tag, then we wait, because of how GitHub apps work, they receive a webhook event from GitHub. Our backend receives that event. And right now there's no feedback about when this publish has finished. So I just wrote a little built-in command to just wait for that. You can see it took 6 seconds, which is not that bad. And then we've got a second module, like in Roger's example, where we depend on this first module that we just published. We import it, and then we just print out with another field what the value of foo was. And you can see we expect the output. We expect the output to be of QExport to be that struct right there. And you can see that passes. So that is, again, what Roger just demoed, but automated. And the other one, I'm not going to show the whole thing, but very briefly, it's effectively a similar thing, but instead of using GitHub with the GitHub app, it uses a Google Cloud Artifact Registry repo. So this authenticates gcloud in the script, basically just giving the same config that the host has. And then we do qmod upload. You can see it there with the version. And then same deal as before, we go to a module that depends on it, and we QExport, and we see that it worked. And this is using, so gcloud. Well, gcloud in my laptop is authorized with my developer keys. So it does have access to push images and download them. So that is the authentication that is being passed through to the test. And the last thing I will show is that this is hooked up. Don't actually look at the fact that Windows just failed. That is a flag that I just filed. But if you go to...
Failed on purpose, right?
Yeah, it's very realistic, the fact that CI just failed as I was going to demo this. But if you go to our latest master commit and you look at what Linux on the latest Go version is doing, there's some steps that only run on this environment. And you can see here the gcloud authentication is being set up because it's a secret on our CI setup. And you can see that this is running the same end-to-end test I just demoed. It's not with the verbose flag, so you don't actually see what's happening, but 15 seconds, that is both tests having run. So the nice thing about this is that as we develop modules, we're not, of course, manually end-to-end testing everything like Roger just showed you. We have these automated tests. It's just for the main workflow, but it does cover all the moving pieces that are remote. So that's nice.
Very nice. I've shared my screen again. That's great. So again, just confirming that really is an automated version of that, of what Roger demoed. But beyond that, I think as we talked about earlier on, what it's also going to serve, those end-to-end tests are also going to serve as a nice form of use case documentation, for want of a better phrase, so that we can be very clear to people what we have actually covered and got support for. And if somebody turns up and says, oh, what about scenario X here? We can, in theory, not necessarily in practice, say, oh, that's covered by this test combined with this test in effect. Or we can say, actually, you know what, that is a gap. And then we can then be sure that we have got coverage of these use cases via these end-to-end tests that we have. Sorry, I clicked forward a slide without intending to do that. Good. Okay. Then just briefly moving on, it's still on our slate to update the modules proposal docs. That's our bad on not moving that forward. We've been heads down on actually really trying to nail some of the auth side of things on the module side of things. So we've been working on the actual implementation, this experimental implementation at the cost of updating these module proposal docs. So apologies for that. We will get round to updating those and publishing them. At this point, I think we're pretty much done, and unbelievably, we're under time. This has now happened 2 days in a row, which seems impossible. Anybody got any questions or things that we haven't covered? Please, now would be a good time. And of course, also take questions in the GitHub discussion afterwards and on Slack. Thanks to all those who've been engaging on Slack. Did some great conversations recently. So if there's nothing else now, I'll say goodbye from KubeCon. Oh, Daniel has raised a hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly clarify, if anybody's watching this recording later, please still feel free to send questions, even if it's 1 or 2 or 5 days later. There's no requirement about we're only going to answer questions
Thank you.
in the next X hours.
Thank you for clarifying. In which case, I'll say cheerio from KubeCon, and we'll publish the recording along with transcript, etc., as soon as it's available. Thanks, everyone.